On a wide plain beneath the hills of Megiddo, Egyptian and Canaanite chariots crash together in a storm of dust and shouting. This is 1457 BCE, one of the earliest battles in history we can truly reconstruct. At the very front rides Pharaoh Thutmose III, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, standing in his speeding war chariot. Wearing the blue battle crown and drawing his bow, he leads the Egyptian charge straight toward Megiddo. Behind him stretches a line of massed Egyptian chariots, horses galloping in perfect rhythm, bronze-rimmed wheels flashing in the sun. They advance in tight formation, aiming to break the Canaanite coalition before it can fully organize. Facing them, Canaanite chariots thunder forward, shields painted in bright colors, plumed helmets catching the light. On the hill behind, the fortified city of Megiddo watches as its fate is decided below. From high above the battlefield, the chaos resolves into patterns, two swirling masses of chariots and infantry colliding, standards and banners whip in the wind, marking where each side's courage is holding or failing. Egyptian archers loose volleys from the back of moving chariots, their arrows arcing in deadly curves toward the enemy line. This combination of mobility and ranged fire is one of Egypt's greatest battlefield strengths. Soon, the plain below Megiddo is littered with wrecked chariots, toppled warriors, and terrified horses rearing against the confusion. The battle is brutal and close, but Egyptian discipline begins to turn the tide. Behind the chariots, ranks of Egyptian infantry advance steadily, protected by round shields and leveled spears. Their job is to secure the ground that the chariots have shattered and to push inexorably toward the city. Under the pressure of the Egyptian assault, Canaanite soldiers begin to break and run, sprinting back toward the safety of Megiddo's gates. Panic spread through their ranks as those gates loom nearer and perhaps dangerously might close. Thutmose III's chariot raced past the routed enemy, his horses kicking up dust that blurs the scene into a heroic blur of motion. Ancient artists would later carve moments like this into stone, immortalizing his victory. Here we see Thutmose III close up in full battle attire, blue crown tight on his head, scale armor catching the light. His stern expression reflects both royal confidence and the weight of commanding thousands of lives. Opposite him stands the leader of the Canaanite coalition, the king of Kadesh, rallying allies from across Canaan and Syria. In ornate robes and bronze helmet, he urges his troops to resist Egypt's tightening grip. Egyptian officers stride along the lines, pointing and shouting orders above the roar of battle. In their hands they carry decorated staves of command, symbols that turn chaos into coordinated action. A standard-bearer holds high an Egyptian war banner, emblazoned with falcon and sun disk. Even amid dust and danger, that symbol tells the army that their pharaoh and the god Amun march with them. Canaanite infantry tried to form a solid wall of spears and large shields to blunt the Egyptian advance. Dust swirled around them as chariots wheeled past, testing their courage and their cohesion. Trumpets and drums echo across the field as Egyptian musicians signal new maneuvers for chariots and foot soldiers. In a world without radios, this sound is the command network of the army. From behind, we see Egyptian chariots lined up before another charge, horses pawing the ground impatiently. The sun rises over the plain, casting long shadows as men and animals prepare to risk everything again. On the other side, Canaanite chariot teams sit tensely in richly decorated harnesses, colorful pennants hanging still in the brief calm. They wait for the signal that will send them hurtling once more into danger. High on low hills above the battlefield, Egyptian and Canaanite scouts watch one another carefully. Between them lies Megiddo, a prize so valuable that both sides are willing to gamble their survival. Around Thutmose's own chariot stands an elite bodyguard unit, shields and armor more ornate than those of ordinary soldiers. Their sole duty is to keep the pharaoh alive, no matter what the battle demands. Long before the clash at Megiddo, the Egyptian army marched north from the Nile Valley into foreign lands. Infantry, chariots, and pack animals stretched for kilometers under the unforgiving desert sun. Approaching Canaan, Thutmose faced a key decision: which road to take. He chose the narrow, risky Aruna Pass, forcing his army into a tight single-file route between steep rocky walls. From above, the Aruna Pass looks like a stone throat, forcing the Egyptian column into a thin line. Any ambush here could have been disastrous, annihilating the army piecemeal. In his command tent, Thutmose had studied 3 possible routes to Megiddo. Ignoring the safer flanking options, he boldly chose the dangerous but direct Aruna road to surprise his enemies. To protect the column, Egyptian scouts climbed the cliffs above the pass, scanning every ledge for signs of Canaanite forces. Each bend could have concealed archers or rolling stones. Progress was painfully slow, as soldiers dragged chariots over narrow, uneven paths. Wheels slipped, horses struggled, and the entire campaign briefly hung on the army's ability to get through. When the army finally emerged from the pass onto open ground, many soldiers must have felt relief, mixed with dread. Megiddo lay still at a distance, but the Canaanites now knew the Egyptians were coming. That evening, campfires glowed around resting chariots as exhausted troops collapsed on the desert floor. Even in victory, logistics, the ability to move and feed an army, remains a silent second front. At a precious spring along the route, water carriers filled jar after jar to keep men and animals alive. Without these simple efforts, no pharaoh's glory would ever have reached the battlefield. At the rear, the last units of the Egyptian rearguard glanced nervously back into the darkening Aruna Pass. Any delayed Canaanite attack from behind could have turned bold strategy into catastrophe. Soon, the Egyptian army stood before Megiddo itself, a fortified city on a hill, guarded by thick walls and strong gate towers. Below, thousands of Egyptian tents filled the plain, signaling that this would not be a quick fight. Instead of storming the city immediately, Egyptian soldiers began building a wooden palisade and moat encircling Megiddo. They turned the siege inside out, trapping the defenders as if Megiddo was the besieged camp, not the attacker. The siege of Megiddo saw archers on both sides trading arrows, shafts arcing up and down between walls and attackers. Each volley reminded defenders that Egypt had the patience and resources to wait them out. From the battlements, Canaanite defenders threw stones and fired arrows at Egyptian troops below. Every attempt to approach the walls carried the risk of being hit from above. At moments of assault, Egyptian soldiers raised ladders against the stone walls and tried to climb under a hail of missiles. Some fell back, others pressed on, but the key to victory would be starvation, not just bravery. Megiddo's great city gates stayed closed, heavy doors barred and iron-tipped timbers braced behind them. Through narrow arrow slits, defenders watched the tightening Egyptian noose. By night, the hill of Megiddo loomed dark above a ring of Egyptian campfires. The besieged city became an island of shadow surrounded by a sea of flickering lights. Inside the walls, streets grew crowded as soldiers and civilians jostled for space and scarce supplies. Officials counted food stores carefully, knowing that once they ran out, surrender would be inevitable. Egyptian engineers oversaw systematic construction of siege works, ramps, ditches, and earthen defenses facing the city. The attackers were both at war and at work, turning the landscape itself into a weapon. At last, after months of pressure, a white flag of surrender appeared above Megiddo's walls. Egyptian soldiers watched as the city, once confident behind its fortifications, admitted that it could no longer hold out. In his royal war tent, Thutmose III met with his generals over clay tablets and maps of Canaan. Here, they debated routes, supply lines, and how best to turn victory at Megiddo into long-term control. Before major engagements, Egyptian priests performed rituals in the camp, burning incense on a small altar to Amun. They asked the god to favor Thutmose as the rightful ruler of foreign lands. A diviner examined the liver of a sacrificed animal, reading shapes and markings as omens of the coming battle. Around him, officers watched intently, hoping for a sign of divine approval. Not far away, a scribe sat beneath a canopy, carefully recording each day's events on papyrus scrolls. His work would become the core of the official record of the campaign. Rows of tents stretched in neat lines across the plain, each unit assigned its place, chariots parked in orderly rows, standards fluttered in the breeze, turning the camp into a temporary moving city of war. By firelight, soldiers sharpened bronze blades and spear points, their faces lit by sparks from grinding stones. Conversation was hushed as each man contemplated the dangers ahead. Egyptian medical attendants worked in a simple field hospital tent, bandaging wounds and setting broken bones as best they could. Their tools were basic, but their care meant some soldiers would fight another day. In quieter moments, soldiers shared bread, beer, and dried meat around small cooking fires. They told stories of home and past battles, trying to push fear aside with companionship. Occasionally, Canaanite envoys approached the Egyptian camp under guard, carrying messages from within Megiddo. Their presence showed that even in war, words and negotiations still had a role. At dawn, trumpets sounded through the camp, waking men as the sky glowed pink over the valley. Another day of waiting, working, or fighting had begun. Far away in Egypt, the inner halls of Karnak Temple rose in colossal stone grandeur, their columns carved with scenes of Pharaoh's power. This would become the place where Megiddo's story was immortalized. On one wall, artists carved Thutmose III in the classic smiting pose, grasping a group of captive Canaanite chiefs by the hair. Before the god Amun, he smashes them with a raised mace, embodying divine justice. Close up, neat lines of hieroglyphs run alongside these images, describing the Battle of Megiddo in the pharaoh's own words. His titles, victories, and pious acts are all carefully recorded inside royal cartouches. Another scene shows Egyptian chariots charging into battle, horses in mid-gallop, archers ready to shoot. Though stylized, this relief preserves how ancient Egyptians imagined their own warfare. The campaign scribe Chaneni is also depicted, kneeling with stylus and palette in hand. His role as eyewitness and recorder links the dusty battlefield to the cool stone of Karnak. Painted reliefs show Thutmose presenting the spoils of Megiddo, gold, chariots, and exotic goods to the god Amun. Victory is framed not just as military success, but as a sacred offering. Priests at Karnak read these inscriptions aloud during ceremonies, reminding elites of the pharaoh's triumphs in foreign lands. The memory of Megiddo thus became part of Egypt's religious calendar. On another wall, Amun-Ra sits enthroned, receiving Thutmose as conqueror of Asia. In this vision, the pharaoh's authority extends across deserts and mountains by divine decree. Centuries later, broken fragments of these reliefs lie on a museum table, carefully arranged by conservators. Their patient work lets us piece together the story that Thutmose wanted the world to hear. Artistic reconstructions reimagine the Karnak battle wall as it once was, freshly painted, vivid, and overwhelming. In its prime, this was less a record and more a monumental piece of propaganda. 61 through 70, Spoils, Prisoners, and the Submission of Canaan. 1. After the surrender of Megiddo, Egyptian scribes began the practical work of listing everything captured. They measured and recorded chariots, horses, weapons, and valuables with meticulous care. Outside the camp, piles of captured Canaanite chariots and armor grew impressively high. These spoils were proof that Egypt's power now dominated the region. Lines of bound prisoners shuffled past Thutmose's chariot, their hands tied, heads bowed. Some would be ransomed, others integrated as labor, all serving as living reminders of defeat. Kneeling before the pharaoh, captured nobles begged for mercy and offered rich tribute. Their submission helped turn former enemies into tributary allies under Egyptian oversight. Nearby, soldiers counted captured horses, entering numbers on tablets and lists. This careful accounting ensured that Egypt converted victory into lasting military advantage. Soon, Canaanite rulers from across the region arrived bearing lavish gifts, gold, textiles, and exotic goods. They hoped generosity would secure their positions under the new balance of power. Thutmose sat on a portable throne to receive these defeated kings, each bowing deeply before him. This ceremony symbolized not just one battle won, but an entire political order reshaped. Egyptian troops raised the pharaoh's banner above Megiddo's gate, a bold visual claim that the city now answered to the Nile. The once independent stronghold had become an outpost of Egyptian might. Local inhabitants watched as administrators, soldiers, and scribes took control of key buildings and stores. Their mixed expressions, fear, relief, resentment, reflected the complicated reality of conquest. Finally, Canaanite leaders swore renewed allegiance to Egypt, hands lifted in oath. With their promises and Egypt's garrisons, Thutmose turned a battlefield victory into long-term dominance.
Ancient map-style images show Egypt at the Nile and Canaan to the north, with a route line marking Thutmose's march to Megiddo. Even simple representations helped commanders understand the geography of empire. A close-up of a papyrus scroll in hieratic script reveals parts of the Megiddo campaign narrative. These fragile documents once carried the living memory of the war across generations. On a clay tablet, a rough sketch of Megiddo's surroundings shows hills, roads, and the key approach routes. Such military maps allowed planners to think strategically about terrain. In a scribal school, an experienced scribe explains the Megiddo record to young trainees. They learn not just to write, but to shape how future ages will remember this pharaoh. A table piled with scrolls, tally sticks, and inventory lists illustrates the bureaucratic side of war. Every chariot and every sack of grain is turned into a line of text. Modern infographics echo this tradition, showing Egyptian chariot divisions and infantry formations at Megiddo. What was once propaganda is now raw data for historians. A stylized timeline of Thutmose's III's many campaigns highlights Megiddo as his first great independent victory. From this starting point, he would go on to dominate much of the Near East. Some scrolls may have carried illustrated scenes of Thutmose in his chariot, blending image and text. These were the graphic novels of their time, celebrating royal heroism. Today, reconstructions attempt to imagine lost papyri that once detailed troop numbers and routes. Though the originals are gone, the outlines survive in stone and in later copies. Hands roll up a finished scroll and seal it with clay, locking the story of Megiddo into an official version. This act turns fleeting events into enduring history. Now we leap forward more than 3,000 years to an aerial view of modern Tel Megiddo. The mound of ruins rises above the green Jezreel Valley, silent witness to countless forgotten battles. On its slopes, archaeologists carefully excavate layers of ancient walls and gates from the late Bronze Age. Each stone they uncover brings us closer to the city Thutmose once besieged. A trowel brushes dust from a pottery sherd stamped with Egyptian markings found at Megiddo. This small fragment hints at the presence of Egyptian influence after the Great Victory. At sunrise, the Jezreel Valley glows in soft light, and we can almost imagine Egyptian and Canaanite armies marching across it again. The landscape endures, even as empires rise and fall. In a museum, artifacts from Megiddo, arrowheads, chariot fittings, scarabs, sit displayed under careful lighting. Together, they reconstruct the world behind the inscriptions. A tour guide stands atop the mound, explaining the Battle of Megiddo to visitors who look out over the same valley. The ancient site becomes a classroom under the open sky. Modern information signs at Tel Megiddo show diagrams of battle positions and siege lines. They connect the ground beneath visitors' feet to the distant events of 1457 BCE. A drone camera circles the remains of Megiddo's city gate, once defended against Thutmose's forces. Now, broken stones hint at a time when this entrance controlled life and death. Side by side, we see an ancient artistic depiction of Megiddo next to a modern archaeological reconstruction. The dialogue between past imagination and present science deepens our understanding. Concept art envisions a time lapse. Megiddo under Bronze Age siege fades into the same hill in the present day. It reminds us that time reshapes even the mightiest fortresses.
In a modern classroom, a history teacher projects maps and images of the Battle of Megiddo for students. What was once Pharaoh's propaganda is now a case study in early warfare and empire. An educational poster titled Battle of Megiddo, one of the earliest recorded battles, summarizes dates, locations, and key facts. It distills a complex campaign into a snapshot that anyone can grasp. A textbook page shows photographs of Karnak's walls alongside diagrams explaining how the Megiddo story is carved into stone. Words and images together bring the ancient record to life. A split-screen comparison sets Egyptian chariots against modern tanks. Across millennia, the tools change, but the basic idea of projecting power across distances remains hauntingly similar. On a computer screen, a digital 3D model recreates the Battle of Megiddo battlefield, hills and plains rendered in precise detail. Students can fly over the terrain that once decided the fate of Canaan. Storyboard frames for an animated documentary sketch out the key moments: the risky Aruna Pass, the clash of chariots, the long siege. Frame by frame, a 3,400-year-old story becomes a modern narrative. A dramatic book cover shows Thutmose in his chariot, Megiddo burning behind him under a darkening sky. This visual hook invites new readers to explore one of history's earliest recorded campaigns. A timeline graphic places the Lagash-Umma conflict and the Battle of Megiddo side by side. we see how different cultures, centuries apart, left us the first clear records of organized war. A concept collage blends Karnak reliefs, siege scenes, and modern excavation photos into one image. It captures the full journey, from ancient action to ancient memory to modern rediscovery. Finally, an epic cinematic poster labeled Megiddo, 1457 BCE, unites Thutmose III, his chariots, and the fortified city under stormy skies. One place, one campaign, and a story that begins as royal propaganda but ends as a crucial chapter in the global history of war.